Hey, praise the Lord, guys. I'm Straw Greenhorn. Now there came a leper unto Jesus, beseeching him, kneeling before him, saying, If thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. And Jesus had compassion on him, and stretched forth his hand and touched him, and said, I will, be thou made clean. And as soon as he had spoken this, his leprosy departed, and he was cleansed. Now Jesus straightly charged him, and sent him away forthwith, saying, See that thou tell no man, but go, show thyself unto the priest, and offer for thy cleansing that which Moses commanded. But instead he went out and began to publish the matter abroad and to blaze it much, insomuch that Jesus was unable to enter freely into the city, but was without in a desert place, and they were gathered unto him from every quarter. Okay, so here Jesus is continuing, his ministry. We see him in the last one where he said, where well, first of all he was in the house, Simon Peter's house, and the whole city came unto him at the door of the house, and he healed them and cast out devils. Then he rose up early the next morning and went to pray, and then they all came seeking him, and he said, it's time for us to go over into other towns, to preach the gospel there also. So, we see right here his fame really being spread abroad, because this person, they ran up unto him and straightly desired that they be cleansed from their leprosy. Now you must understand, with leprosy, lepers, they were put out of the camp of Israel. This was how it was, in the days of Moses, when the law was given, the Levitical laws. They weren't allowed to come into the city because it was so contagious and there was no cure. We see Jesus put it in his hands on this person, really breaking all kinds of protocol, because you touched a leper, you were deemed to be unclean until the evening, and it was required that the priest examine you, and you were to be shut up inside for 7 days, and then they would examine you to see if the leprosy ever spread in your body. Depending on if it was spread or not, if it was, then you would be kicked out of the camp, and you'd have to go live on the outskirts pretty much. But if you were clean, then you would just offer your sacrifice, your offering, and then return to your regular life. But you were shut up for 7 days. That's how seriously they took leprosy. So Jesus, put in his hands on this person. But Jesus, he is who he is. So there was no fear in him touching this man. But just understand that if this was a regular person, the risk that they would be taking. Because should this thing start growing on them, leprosy is a mycobacteria. It's like tuberculosis. The treatment for this disease is usually like a year of medication to treat an infection. Infections, they usually go away in like maybe a couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks, even a week, depending on what it is and what medicine you're taking. And the reason why is because it's so slow growing. You see, these medications, they target, these microorganisms when they replicate, when they divide. So, they eat and then they divide in two. And so it targets it. When it divides, it messes up the daughter cell. When it divides, it produces, it's called daughter cells. Whether it messes with the cell wall, the cell membrane, messes with its metabolism, its enzymes, whatever course of action it takes, the offspring cells are what's messed up. So imagine this cell sitting there doesn't and not dividing for weeks, even months. How is the medication gonna work? That's why it takes so long, because it takes so long to divide. We have modern medicine now, so we can understand these things. But this wasn't available back then, because, like I said, the risk that if it was a regular person that they would be taking, touching this person, because you would become an outcast and you'd be kicked out of civilization. You'd have to go live on the outskirts of the town with the other lepers. They were called lepers. We see Jesus, giving him a charge. See that thou tell no man, because that spread his fame even more, and even more people came after him. But you got to understand that Jesus, he knows the spirits, right? He understood that if this man was to go and publish the everything, that this would happen, because his fame was rising so fast and so high that all those that had diseases, they would have heard and they would have come seeking. So why was that such a problem? Why not just have everyone come onto him? Because he had a method, really. It was balancing everything, balancing preaching, balancing healing. And he had, all right, so remember when his mom wanted him to do that miracle, turn the water into wine. He said, Woman, what have I to do with thee? My time is not yet come. He knows the time that and the seasons, when everything should be done. And he was basically saying that it's not time. But like I said, he could also tell the spirit, because if you remember at one point, one person came unto Jesus and he said, Master, I will follow you whithersoever thou goest. Jesus said, Foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man had not where to lay his head. He spoke to him like this. But then the very next person that he saw, Jesus said, come and follow me. He told this guy to follow me. So why would he tell one, foxes have holes, the birds of the air have nests? You're saying that you want to follow me, but I'm telling you what this lifestyle is. kind of like even rebuking him. But then to the next person, he would so go and give an open invitation. It's because he could see the spirit that was behind. Who wants to follow for the glamour and the glimmer, the lifestyle, versus who's a genuine person and can really be an asset, to his team. All right, so let's get into these scriptures. It starts out saying, "Then came a leper unto him, beseeching him and kneeling before him, saying, If thou wilt, thou canst make me clean." So we see this leper. So he got word somehow that Jesus was able to do these things. That's how much his fame was spreading. But like I said, these people, they were not allowed to be in contact with everybody else. They were just not allowed. They could get in a serious problem, even maybe stoned, killed for breaking this protocol because, you might cause an outbreak. And how many innocent people that, would have been spared if you had just kept away. But now, their lives are also ruined. So he somehow got wind of what was going on. That's how much his fame, was being spread abroad, that this guy heard, because he was supposed to be in a place where nobody was. Maybe he had like a close family member that, was in the midst of everything and seen everything happen and said, that, I have, my cousin or whatever he was, to him or her. And they have leprosy. So I mean, I bet Jesus is also able to cure this, and they must have brought them word, or however they heard. When Jesus was passing by the blind man, the blind man asked, what it meant, and they told him Jesus of Nazareth passed it by. Obviously, he couldn't see, but he heard. He heard the crowd, the commotion, and everything going on, and obviously it was an unusual happening. So he heard somehow, and he took a risk, coming. Because, what if it didn't work? What if it was just a hoax? We saw in the Old Testament where Elijah healed Naaman the Syrian of leprosy, but, we didn't really see, anybody else. And Jesus even mentioned it when he said, how many widows, were in the days of Elijah, but yes, said he was only sent unto that one lady, the one that had the meal that lasted the entire, famine. And how many lepers, he said, also were in Israel, yet only Naaman the Syrian, he wasn't even Israelite, was cleansed. So, he's taking a huge risk, coming unto Jesus, mingling with everyone. And, if they were to see him and see that he was leprous, what would they do? Would they just tell him to leave, respectfully? Or would they take a more, fierce approach? Because, you're putting everybody at risk with this. So, he came. He believed and he came. So when he saw him, he ran and knelt before him, beseeching him. That's like presenting yourself, from humility, like, bowing down, pretty much, exalting the person over you, humbling himself. How many people come, to God asking for whatever it might be, whether healing, a certain situation to work out, but, they come with the wrong attitude. They don't, they don't really come. They come too super entitled or too complacent, entitled or complacent, just, being wishy-washy, or even maybe just not expecting it even to work. So, he said unto him, if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. So it's all up to you, Lord. I have no say in this. And this, goes along with the point where God, he gets all the glory. He said, I am the Lord, and my praise I will not give to another, neither my glory to graven images. When, Jesus was transfigured and they saw, Jesus, Moses, and Elias up in the mountain at the transfiguration, they wanted to make three tabernacles, one for him, one for Moses and Elias. And that these are things of worship. So they were so afraid. But then the voice spoke to them and said, this is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. And then right after that, they saw only Jesus. So, he doesn't give, his glory to another. And this guy, he came kneeling and beseeching, giving God all the glory. Said, if thou canst, not if we can, or not if you do it and then I walk around pretending as if I did it myself. But, you get all the glory because it is you that did it. If thou canst, if thou wills, thou can make me clean. So pay attention to the wording and understand, who God is and what, the people that, got things from him, what they did, what principles, did they abide by. So we see this man humbling himself, giving God all the glory before it even happened, acknowledging that, if you will, you can make me clean. It's all up to you. It's all in your word. I'm just here, humbling myself, asking for you to help me. My life has been, hard enough so far. These guys, obviously they can't work or trade. How do they get food? Do they have to depend on the kindness of strangers to bring them food? Family members, maybe. It's not like they can go into the open area and beg even, because even then they're still putting people at risk. Just understand just how serious, leprosy was in those days. And then it says, Jesus had compassion on him, and he stretched forward his hand and touched him and said, be thou made clean. So we see how humble, Jesus really was, because, here it says that he had compassion on them. A lot of these, mega ministry churches and these people that, claim all these things, when you see them, they're so pompous, they're so arrogant, in their ministry. It's like, if you see them, you will really believe that they think that it's them that's doing it. I even heard one minister said that, virtue is going out of his body. Just like for Jesus, because when the woman with the issue of blood touched him, he said, I know somebody touched me because I perceive that virtue is gone out of me. We got to understand it's God that heals. I once saw a minister that, they usually wave something over the people and then, they fall out. So he waved it over this guy and he did not fall out. And then he got upset with him. Like, you see, you have no respect for me. Like, that's how he was talking to him. Like, you see Jesus' humility right here. He had compassion on him. It takes humility to have compassion. Because compassion is being able to take yourself out of your own skin and put yourself in somebody else's, and to sympathize with them and understand the challenges that they must face and the difficulty that must be happening in their life. So it said that Jesus had compassion on him, and he said, I will. He answered the question. He was speaking to him here, person to person. Some of these, like I said, these ministers, they don't even have really that much authority, but the way that they speak, you would think that there was a king and you're paying homage to them. Jesus answered the question directly, I will, be thou made whole. So he stretched forth his hand and touched him. So like I said, and I understand that, laws were given, Levitical laws were given, because leprosy, it was possible to be in a house, it was possible to be in a garment, like clothing. You'd be able to tell by the discoloration. And then, like I said, for a week, they would, put it away and you see if it spread. Then they would know that the garment or the house was leprous, and it would either have to be taken down and burnt, or gotten rid of somehow. And when they burned the ashes, they had to take it away in a place outside of the camp. So Jesus here putting his hands forward and touching this man. If he wasn't who he said he was, he would be taking a huge risk right here, because that gets on him and then it starts spreading. What would he do? So Jesus had compassion on him. Don't overlook that verse. He had compassion on him. We could spend just a whole good time just sitting around here and expounding on this. Jesus had compassion on him. The Bible says we now have a high priest that has been touched with the feelings of all our infirmities, because he was tempted in every like manner as we were, yet without sin. He didn't just rush to heal him and then go around waving his hands, bragging or being pompous, showing off what he could do. He took a moment and he sympathized with this man. He felt his struggles, he felt his pain, his rejection. He felt, what he'd been through, everything he, had to go through on a daily basis. Like I said, food, where did he, those days they showered in the river, right? They got, water from wells. How did this guy shower? How did he, get to wash his clothes? Where did he sleep? Was he at, was he in a house with other lepers? Did they have a place designated for them? Was he at risk of, being hunted by wild animals? We know the story of the prophet who disobeyed God. And, God sent him to deliver a message and to leave, not even by the same way that he went in, but to leave by the opposite way, to eat nothing nor speak to anyone. But then, this elder prophet came and he deceived him. He said that, God gave him a message to come home with him and eat. And then, the God, he sent a message, saying, since thou hast disobeyed, behold, a lion shall find thee and slay thee. And that's exactly what happened. So he stretched forth his hand and touched him. And then the Bible says, and immediately after he spoke, the leprosy departed and he was made clean. So it clarifies itself here that it was the word that healed this man. The touch was just a part of his compassion. He said as soon as he had spoken, the leprosy departed and he was made clean. We know that the woman with the issue of blood touched the hem of his garment and she was made whole. He didn't say anything. So it was the touch that healed her. But now it says as soon as he had spoken, the leprosy departed. The touch was just a part of his compassion on him. Jesus, when he heals, he has, many things that he does. He took clay and spittle and he anointed, that man's eyes, and he told him to go wash in the pool. I believe it was of Siloam. At one point, we see him spit on his fingers and put it in the deaf guy's ears, and he was able to hear. The 10 lepers. All he told them to do was go and show yourself unto the priest. He didn't touch them. He didn't do anything else. He didn't even say you were made whole. He told them, go and show yourself unto the priest. And as they walked towards the priest, with each step they took, they were cleansed, they were whole, they were made whole. The man that lay in the bed sick of a palsy, when he was in the house and they couldn't get to him, they opened the roof and let him down by a cord, a rope. And Jesus looked up and he saw their faith. Not just the man's faith, but his friend's faith. And he said, be of good cheer, thy faith has made thee whole. So, he has many ways that he does his healing. So as soon as he had spoken, the leprosy departed and he was cleansed. Then it says, and straightly he charged them and forthwith sent him away. So straightly right here, charging him and sending him away. So here he's making him know and understand, the severity of what I'm about to tell you. Listen to what I'm saying, because he told him, as you would see next, that, don't tell anyone. So and straightly he charged him. That's like almost like an oath, but right unto the brink of an oath, because he said, swear not at all. Thou hast heard it said of them of old, thou shalt not forswear thyself. But I say unto thee, swear not at all, not by heavens, for it is God's throne, neither by the earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king, neither by thy own head, because that thou canst not make one hair black nor white. And he warned them, saying that anything that's greater than this cometh from evil. So he charged him. He didn't make him swear. That's like almost, that's as close as you can come to swearing without swearing. So this, him doing this, you would make it understand that this was very important. And I need you to cooperate with me. And I know I just did you a huge favor, but I need you to do me one. So he straightly charged him and sent him away forthwith. And what did he say? He said, go unto the priest. Go show thyself unto the priest, and offer for thy cleansing the offering that Moses commanded, for a testimony unto them. So in the old days, whenever a person came to a close contact with leprosy, like I said, either the garment, the house, or they thought that, because whenever a certain scab would come up, if it was white, no, a scab, if the hair in the middle of it was white, it was suspected to be leprosy. So then, like I said, they would observe them for 7 days, and if it didn't spread, then they would know. If it didn't spread or go, deeper than the skin, then we would know that the person was safe, and then they would go and offer the cleansing. I forgot what it was. I think it was turtle doves, or whatever animal it was. So he's sending them here to go, and do this for a testimony unto them, to show that the law, he came to fulfill the law. So we're no longer under law but under grace. But he didn't come to do away with the law. He came to fulfill the law. So here he is paying what he's doing right now. He's paying respect to the law. Go and offer the gift that Moses commanded. So now we're obeying Moses. We're not just being rebellious. Yeah, I am the son of God, but we're not being pig-headed and rebellious and pompous and boastful and exalting himself. So go offer the gift that Moses commanded for a testimony unto them, because they'll see him and they'll know that this was the guy that had leprosy. Because like I said, all lepers, they were pronounced unclean by the priest, and then they were put out. So at some point, he was pronounced unclean by a priest, when he just got it. And, depending on how long he's had it and been put out, the priest might remember him, he might not. But now here he is coming, clean, and he's offering. So this is going to lead them to ask questions, right? Because he said, for a testimony unto them. So then they're going to ask, how did you get clean? Well, Jesus of Nazareth. You mean the guy that everybody's talking about? Yeah, he is real. He is the real deal. You were the one that pronounced me unclean, and look at me now. Here I am, with my turtle doves offering, this offering for cleansing according to the law of Moses. Because like I said, they were still under the law of Moses until the point of his death. Because when he died, there was a great earthquake, and the veil of the temple was torn in twain. That was what gave us access into the most holy of holies. So now, not only the high priest was able to go into the holy of holies, now we are able to come and make our petition known before God. So up until this point, the law of Moses still stands, and it still stands, but we're just under grace and not under law. But then the Bible says, but instead he went out and began to publish it much and to blaze it abroad, insomuch that Jesus was unable to freely enter into the city, but was without in a desert place. And they came unto him from every quarter. So this is what he foresaw happening, that there would be an overload on his ministry. So he couldn't enter into the city and walk freely, because there were so many people. Imagine a crowd of people and you being unable to get through them because the crowd is so thick. There's so many people. Some crowds, there's less people where you can squeeze through or sidestep through people. But then there's crowds where like the crowds that cause stampedes, that hurt people. There's so many people. It's not, they don't do it for spite, and it's not like they can control themselves, because it's like the herd mentality. When if somebody falls and then there's a forward motion and everybody's thrust forward, they're all stepping on that person. It's not like they can stop it. I mean, it would take a great restraint, but oftentimes you don't even see. And that's the next thing. There's so many people you can't see what's on the ground. The only time when you see it is when you step on this person and then you go forward, and the next person behind you steps on them. So it says he went out and began to publish it abroad. I mean, he's telling everybody, and to blaze it throughout the city. In our modern speech, we have this term where people like to say, you put me on blast, or you put something on blast. You're really like publicizing it. So here's a similar term from the Bible. It said he blazed it throughout the whole city, so much so that Jesus could no longer freely enter into the city, but was out into a desert place. And they came unto him from every quarter. So now they had to come unto him. It wasn't his will for him to be in the desert, but because of what this man did, now people had to be of a mind to come and see him. Because remember, what did he say? He said previously that let us go and preach the gospel into other cities, for therefore came I forth. And that's why he came to preach it into all these cities. But now, he's being restricted to the desert. How many people are going to get to hear him? How many people will be unable to make it? The little children, certain elderly people. Even though if they were sick enough, they would make a way to get them out there. But you see the challenge that it now poses, for these people. I am Straw Greenhorn.